Chinese engine mill. Years of taught thought past my eyes, reflecting faces that have gone by. Adam's corner embedded in my soul. In defense of Dorchester, home to 1,000 dreams and big-town legend. In defense of Dorchester, historical reference cemented in her sidewalk.
Welcome, boarding party, to season 2 of the Starboard podcast, where we discuss politics, hot topics, and today's affairs. I'm your host, Rustin, joined by my co-captain Joshua, if that is his real name. And today we're going to start the new season off with, let's kick off the new year with something of a bang, like we always do.
All right, then. So, first off, we hope everyone viewing has had a wonderful new year. I should mention a couple of things before we get started. We are cognizant of the situation that's ongoing in Venezuela, but we will be holding that off until next week's episodes for any further developments that will arise from that. We will also be observing the live sort of reaction to the conflict as it's unfolding, any new developments that have emerged, and we'll give our own commentary as things unfold. I should also note too, even though this is our season 2, a good number of you will be tuning in to the first time, or tuning in for the first time, I should say. The previous episodes of the Starboard podcast, we pre-recorded many of the episodes. We didn't begin uploading them right away. Rather, we sort of examining how things were unfolding and getting into the rhythm of doing the podcast, which I think we've reached a point where we're in a very steady, very comfortable kind of position. So with that being said, while for many of the previous episodes, you'll see postings from them that might even be in some cases out of order, for the start of season 2, we'll be seeing a very consistent upload schedule. Not just for the episodes themselves, but even for individual clips that will be taken from the episode. So, again, mentioning all of this so that any new viewers that are tuning in for the first time, welcome to the Starboard podcast. We are based in Boston, Massachusetts, and while we do discuss many global politics and affairs, we also discuss a lot of domestic affairs too, not just across the country, but even here in Boston as well. So as we cover the varying subjects, the one thing I'd want to say to our new listeners, of course, as you'll see for yourselves, in stark contrast to a lot of the other podcasts that you see online, I'm not saying this so much as a means of bad-mouthing or speaking poorly of the other podcasts, but I think in contrast to a lot of other ones where in many cases you could tell that they're very carefully coordinated, scripted even, and how they tend to be very careful with like a lot of their word choice. So I think the one thing you'll find in the Starboard podcast is that we're both everymen. We're ordinary folks at the end of the day. So when we cover subjects on the podcast, we're not covering them necessarily with the intention of becoming social media influencers. Behaving like so, or we're not trying to imitate them, rather. The reason why we're doing the podcast is we're both very cognizant and very wary of the ongoing events in the world, and we see this as an opportunity to sort of share our own thoughts and also create a sort of a dialogue and a platform. So obviously, things are going to change with the podcast as time goes on, and since we'll be on a consistent upload schedule. In any case, I wanted to clarify all of that to sort of state what our intention is. Obviously, we're referred to, or rather we've chosen the name Starboard Podcast because, since we live in Boston, and, Boston is a seaport city, it is near the coast, and the lighthouse that you see eastward is very, very, famous in Massachusetts. Some would even say, a symbol of the state, as it were. So we've chosen all of these elements precisely to also give sort of an alternative perspective or an additional perspective that you see out there. Even when you look at a lot of the Boston-themed influencers, a lot of them tend to play into a lot of the same preconceptions that people have of Boston. Pack the cat, have it yad, things like that. I think with this sort of like a podcast, with our sort of podcast, the sort of voice we provide is, again, something, to reiterate, something that more ordinary folks would see. something that gives an on-the-ground sort of perspective from. Of course, we try to do our research, and while we do have our own opinions on various subjects, we try to remain understanding of both sides, both left, right, and of course the center too. So we try to factor in everything, try to understand everybody's perspective, and we don't want to say anything that could come off as incendiary. So with that being said, I'm Joshua, as my co-host has mentioned. I'm a man of many names. I've gone through many names. Joshua is the name I'm going by for this podcast. And for my co-host, my own co-captain, Rustin, he and I have known each other for a very long time, over 10 years at this point. So, without further ado, we'll continue with the podcast. Again, we'll discuss various subjects. The structure is going to be a bit loose, but for this episode, for New Year's, I think what better introduction, to have than recapping 2025, having a year in review. So for this episode, we'll be discussing various aspects of 2025, be it, what had happened in our personal lives, what's going on globally, and of course, hopes and, predictions for 2026. So I don't know if my co-host wants to start us off on that, just in any order, just anything that comes to mind, and then we'll kick it off from there.
Try.
Yeah. So what do you want to start with?
Listeners, we do cover politics, and we usually cover topics that other podcasts are afraid to talk about, or at least be afraid to be honest about. So let me start off with some politics of our own. So of course, Donald Trump, he started his second term not that long ago, and he's done so with some new policies and leaderships, even more ruthlessly, including the Secretary of War. And of course, let's not leave out his reign of tariffs. And yeah, they've been crazy lately, especially with even, a pasta tariff. And yeah, and speaking of war, there's the international tensions such as the Russia-Ukraine being escalated, and of course the fragile ceasefire emerged in the Israel-Hamas conflict. And then of course, like my co-host said, there's the U.S. conducting strikes against Iran and of course now recently Venezuela. And what we also covered in the last season, which was big deal in the U.S., was the new Pope, who was the first Pope from America, and right after Pope Francis passed away. And speaking of deaths, there's also Rob Reiner, who I believe, covered. If not, we will cover one day. Of course, there's controversial wrestler and legend Hulk Hogan. And then for my rockers, there's Kiss guitarist Ace Frehley. And we also talked about, during our whole beginnings, the rise of AI, especially in expanding into visual creation, enabling vibe coding, where non-professionals create code quickly, and increase the power of large language models, known as LLMs, and how it really, interfered in the job market. And there's just less jobs because there's less, use for people, doing that, because AI is doing it for them, and it's saving a lot of money. And have we talked about the crazy weather, such as the wildfires, which we have covered, in terms of California. And then, of course, there's the floods. I believe Texas has had one recently that was very severe. And of course, there's the droughts that cause significant damage globally, leading to horsepipe bans in the UK. And I believe we covered that also. So that's just a little something of what we covered and what's been going on recently, as it was last year of 2025. So, Joshua, did you want to have any comments, or do you have anything you'd like to add?
Looking at our own personal lives is also important. When one looks at the surrounding situation, you should also use it as a way to sort of inform yourself, and also think, okay, what's the best way to go about things, and sort of looking at your place amidst all of the surrounding environment. So if I were to start off with reflecting on how 2025 was, so I would say that 2025 was a very difficult year for me in many respects. Not only did I have a few tragedies befall me, but it was overall a very, very heart-wrenching, very difficult year for me to endure. Of course, I don't want to, to have any kind of sentimentality injected, but rather just stating plainly that there were some days where it was very difficult to get out of bed. It was very overwhelming feeling on many days. Yeah, no, I suppose that's all I would really have to say, I guess, for my own personal life is, it was very, very difficult year. It was a transitionary year. There were some very terrific highlights, but it was otherwise a very difficult one. But I think it was a necessary one. I think it's important for one to to struggle. Again, if my co-host has anything to say with regard to how 2025 was, for him personally, it could be, anything small, could be anything, just anything that all comes to mind. So,
Yeah, sure. Let me say some things. 2025, let me just say I'm still lucky to be alive, pretty much. It was pretty much an illusion for me, to be honest with you, because I thought that 2025 was really, my year, but it turned out it really wasn't, And I want to say a lot of people have that kind of sentiment for any year that happened, whether it was last year or, years before, even in terms of decades. But yeah, it was pretty much an illusion for me because I thought things were headed my way, but they never were. One key takeaway, and I don't want to add to the sadness, just to put it bluntly, it's just that it was nothing but disappointments and broken dreams. You think you had it your way, you think that this was your year, but then it turns out it never was because the things that you thought you were going to enjoy or you have been enjoying, it was never for you. And then you see all these people, that aren't even on your level, just, enjoy it instead. And I've had that struggle for a long, long time. I've always talked to Joshua, being that we known each other for almost now 13 years. We were always seen as the quintessential futures, and that's why we're doing this podcast to basically have something to, share with the crowd, to have, anything in common with us or just feel our views. But also, honestly, this is something that guys like us with our minds that, could have something to fall back on. We always agreed that everybody and their grandma has a podcast. And you know what? Most of them are idiots. And look what they're able to accomplish. So if they can do it, why can't we do it? So this is why we're here. This is why we're sharing it. But in terms of my 2025, yeah, it was definitely an illusion. I've had some momentum, I want to say, but it was just all in my head, and I was just not thinking realistically because I did have a bump in the road, and I mentioned that technically last year's podcast, and that was my email being hacked, and that sent me back a little bit. So I mean, anything can come and get you at any moment in time, especially with the disappointing news that I mentioned. So, and to be honest with you, because I've had some mental health problems for what on and off the last 7 years, including now, and it's important to highlight that because there are listeners who have mental health problems, and I want to say I am with you, I am there, and I definitely feel what you're feeling. You just feel like you're the best, and that there's a lot of pressure on you, or you check all the boxes, like I believe I check all the boxes, and that you're disappointing yourself that you didn't make it to a level you're supposed to be at. You know what? It's okay. It's terrible, but it's okay. That's basically what life is, and that's pretty much what I've been dealing with, last year and many years before. And each year for me, I want to mask it as something positive, but it was just always something there, and it's disappointing. But the thing is, I survived, and that's pretty much my fuel. It's just survival. There will be happy times, there will be bad, but it'll be survival for me. But it doesn't have to be for you. However you want to deal with it, do it the best way you could. But that's basically how my 2025 was. I'm disappointed again as usual, but I'm still alive, and that's the important thing. I do have a family that cares and will back me up. So I think my take for people who are in my position that felt that way in 2025 is to just make sure you have a circle, even if it's small. And preferably, I would like it for you to be small because you can't trust everybody. So enjoy life as best you can, and I want you to remember that it's okay to be disappointed and to fail because you can't pass anything in life and succeed without failing first. And of course, you got to have people around you that'll tell you the truth, but also have your back. So again, uncertainty is a big theme in our podcast for those who are just turning in for the first time. And again, it's okay, and this fits with my fellow people who have mental health like I do. Just try, and it's okay to again to be disappointed and to be upset, but don't let that dictate your life. And whatever you feel is toxic, just take it out. If you don't like seeing the bad news, if you don't like seeing the disappointments, just get away from it and do something that's actually for you and that you could be the master of. So that's 2025, and that's basically life because it is transferable to any year in the past or even any year in the future. And I want you all to remember that. That's my take on on last year, and of course life itself. Thank you.
all right, that was very well put. If I were to say anything, it would be that there's always a tomorrow. There's always something to look forward to, and how, even in spite of the difficulties that one might face, and as you had mentioned, sometimes one might have plans that for the year, but they don't end up fulfilling it, and they might find themselves in the same position at the end of the year as they did in the start of the year. That's something I myself have experienced as well. How even in spite of all my efforts, sometimes things might not not pan out, but there's always a tomorrow. And as the saying goes, it's always better to try and fail than to fail to try. If you don't put any effort into anything, then nothing's going to come from it. I think, to be a bit more blunt, if you do nothing, nothing happens. So it's funny, again, because I think the other aspect to this, I would say that for our generation of millennials, a sort of characteristic of a lot of us is a lot of self-doubt, and even self-doubt, self-loathing, but even self-sabotage, I would say, plays a big factor in how, for a lot of our generation, how many of them ended up turning out. Many of them, I would say, have very strong visions for how things will turn out. I would say that many of them do have a very strong worldview, and they do have convictions, they do have commitments and perspectives, but I think that a lot of them tend to get caught up in the heat of the moment, or caught up in the affairs of the day. I think one thing I've noticed from the last 10 years or so, some could say the Trump administration, but I'd want us to go as far back as even just the whole of the 2010s. I tend to notice a lot of our generation get swept up in whatever, new cause, or they see a cause and they get wrapped up into it without understanding what that cause is about necessarily. You could say to a degree that exists now, but I think, when comparing, for example, like the war in Syria versus what's going on in Palestine and Gaza, I think more folks are better informed about the latter than they are about the former, if I'm being honest. I do remember at the time, even outside of global affairs, I'm sure many folks are going to get flashbacks when I say this. Even when you look at a lot of the college campuses, there's a lot of controversies that were circulating about, from Yale, Harvard, just all of those college campuses. A lot of protesting, a lot of conflict, a lot of hardship, and to a degree, even a childishness. As condescending as that sounds, there's even a degree of childishness that you see in a lot of the universities. Some folks have mentioned that there's a lot more coddling of the youth, and I would say that's very much the case. I think that you end up getting a lot of coddling, and that's in part why even Gen Z has turned out the way that they had. I noticed that for Gen Z, in comparison to sort of our generation of millennials, my impression is that Gen Z tend to, when they have strong feelings about something, they'll let it out, so to speak, as if they have a lot of pent-up sort of energy. But when it comes to actually committing to anything or acting on anything, I notice that Gen Z tends to be weaker in that regard. I would say that with our generation of millennials, a lot of millennials will make an effort and will try to commit, but there might end up being a ratio where none of them end up succeeding. Whereas I notice with Gen Z, a good number of them don't even, as judgmental as this sounds, a good number of them don't even make an effort to commit to anything. What would you say?
Well, in light of my take of 2025, I'm going to say this a little more positively and just, with less tension. I agree with most of what you're saying. So I think with Gen Z is that there's a bit of complacency because we are in a generation of technology and, of course, AI taking over. The work's basically, being done for them, to be honest. And being that I have, this is actual people I'm talking. I have, relatives who are parents of Gen Z kids. Basically, the work's being done for them. And they're pretty much, not motivated to do anything because, they just, enable them to just sit there and just do nothing as if they don't have to do anything. I'm talking about the Gen Z themselves. So Gen Z, yeah, the few keywords for me is, coddled and of course complacent because of the coddling. Whereas, the previous generation, no one was doing anything for them and they pretty much took matters into their own hands. So I think it's more just generation being set for those kids and, how things are, if that makes a little bit of sense. With our time, we were left to do the work. We had the platform, the foundations, and it was pretty much up to us to, play with it. While this generation, Gen Z, there is no option because there's nothing built for them, not even anything built for them. So they definitely have not built anything for themselves. So again, it's coddling and pretty much complacency. Those two keywords. So that's pretty much my take on this thing. I used to be a little hard on Gen Z, but now I'm just starting to realize after what I just said, it's pretty much understandable how things are with them. And at the same time, I don't think it's too late to fix that. I think we can show them the way to go, and that even if it's less work required, I mean, we gotta let them know that they have to do something, about it, whatever situation they're in. So that's basically those two words that just needs to be offsetted with actual, examples being made.
I think that's a very good way to put it. I remember when we were, even as far back as high school, the expectation, I'm sure you remember this, was that if you were going to go into the job market or even attend university or college, whatever sort of work you were expected to do, that was going to come from your own efforts. That's to say, a lot of the teachers and faculty at our high school, they gave us support, but the expectation was that, okay, we have to take matters into our own hands. We're on our own, so to speak. And even with what I just mentioned, even with many of our generation that are non-committal fundamentally, they still understand that they have to make the necessary decisions in order to go forward with certain things. And like you mentioned, I do think for Gen Z, I do think there is an opportunity to steer them in the right direction. But I think I think that window is a lot smaller than one would think. That what I mean by that is, I remember hearing that at a certain point, how does the saying go? Like, old dogs can't learn new tricks, something along those lines.
Can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? That's the idiom. My mistake. I remember hearing that because once somebody gets into their routine, once they're set in their ways, so to speak, they're not going to change from that. Or if they are going to change or from being set in their ways, it's going to require a lot of effort to do that. I think for Gen Z, because a lot of the coddling is still, I want to say very, very strong. You also see a lot of coddling, not just from their families, but even the media itself. I think one example for this is, I think Gen Z, even more so than our generation, millennials, I think has a stronger aversion to doing just any kind of labor, period. And it's kind of reached the point where you actually think back to the phenomenon of quiet quitting from a few years back. A good number of those that were quiet quitting, which sure, many of those were millennials like ourselves, but a good number of those were also Gen Z entering the job market for the first time after graduating college and whatnot. And for many of those Gen Z that are, for example, that are working, be it in an office, in an office environment or working in a Starbucks, many of them ended up quiet quitting because they don't see themselves committing to the work. And there's been more than a few memes online, more than a few TikToks online of Gen Z complaining about having to work, period, which unsurprisingly is met with a lot of mockery. But even then, we've discussed before, many issues within the job market itself, and how, even from both of our personal experiences, having a full-time job doesn't grant you any kind of security. And I think now more than ever, if you have a full-time 9 to 5 sort of job, that's not only is that not sufficient insofar as covering personal expenses. I remember back in 2018, 2019, when I was working in the managerial position that I had at that time, I earned, I think it was around $17.50 an hour. To be a bit blunt, even then, a lot of folks think that because of COVID, everything's expensive now. Well, even back in 2018, 2019, $17.50 an hour wasn't even enough to cover one's own expenses. That wouldn't even necessarily be enough to cover was like $2,000 a month apartment, because that's also on top of the other expenses that you need to pay for gas, car, lighting, etc., groceries, things like that. So $17.50, you would have to work another part-time job just to be able to make ends meet. And now for many folks, they have to work three jobs to be able to make ends meet. And even then, that's for the bare minimum. So when you have Gen Z being averse to the job market, it's not unfounded. It's not baseless. When it comes to quiet quitting, you had a lot of those in the media that were taking their side. That was almost encouraging them to sort of quit their job. But of course, as idiotic as many aspects of the job market are and have been, I want to say, even as far back as the recession back in 2008, the objective fact of the matter is, how is one going to make the income to put food on the table? A lot of them end up living with their families, but many of their own, their parents, are getting up there in years, and for many folks, they should be thinking, for a lot of folks, they would find that a little, like strange that, you would have 50, 60 something parents looking after someone who's 20, 25, when it technically should be the other way around. The children should be looking after the parents, not the parents looking after the children. So again, not to, I'm going on a bit of a tangent. I do apologize, but I want to sort of highlight that for the sort of grievances that Gen Z has, it's not unfounded. It's not from nowhere, so to speak. But there's also a lot of that coddling is not just from the family; it's even from like a lot of media outlets. You could even say it's, I don't want to say it's institutionalized, um, but you do see certain organizations validate a lot of what Gen Z feels. So, for our Gen Z listeners in the audience, please don't take this as please don't take this as us looking down on you. This is just a sort of an assessing like how the situation is like. But in any case, since we're getting close to the end of the podcast, you have about 10 minutes left. So let's discuss our hopes and predictions for 2026. So, for my co host, I'll let him start off. I'll let him take charge.
We all want at least to see something, and that's something that my co-host and myself are definitely on agreement with is the Epstein files. Only a teensy weensy little bit finally got released, just last month, right around the last minute as we're approaching the new year, and we're finally here. So we just want to see more files released. So yeah, for those who are tuning in for the first time, that's something we've been, all been wanting to see and hear from for a long, long time. And the names that we've been discussing, during this past year when it comes to the files is, of course, who's in it, who's part of it, and who's in cahoots. And one person we always mention, and especially for his own case, is Diddy. So I think Diddy's in cahoots. I think Diddy has a big part of it. I pretty much know that they know each other, and of course Diddy has his own problems. So that hasn't been revealed yet, but what was revealed, we released in picture form. But we saw a lot of ex-president Bill Clinton. That's kind of not a shock to many people who have finally saw a little bit of the files being released. Of course, there's Michael Jackson and of course his stuff. So some people who believe that Michael Jackson partook in some activities, they felt validated, and to many people's shock, but some not really considering he's a rock star, but legendary rock star Mick Jagger was, part of the files release when it comes to the photographs. So those are some pretty interesting names. Those are names that we're curious to see, and some names surprised us. So yeah, that's a surprise that might not be a surprise, but could definitely draw some eyes and ears. So the Epstein files, we definitely want to learn more of, and I think we're gonna get that. So that's one thing that's a takeaway of mine for 2026 and what to anticipate. So other than that, it's always something. It's always some BS, but it's gonna interest us. So it's just that the Epstein files is just a name that we actually can share and that we actually know of. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have at the top of my head when it comes to this year.
So, of course, there's many folks awaiting the full details of the Epstein files. If I were to say anything on my sort of hopes and predictions for 2026, whatever struggles I had in 2025, I want to make sure that I continue to resolve them and overcome them. I think if regardless of if one wasn't successful beforehand, they should still continue even into 2026. I was also noting that for 2025 was a year of a lot of surprises, mostly negative, and for 2026, things could very well turn out like that. But of course, as with everything, as we've mentioned before on the podcast, there's always a lot of uncertainty. So I think the biggest point of uncertainty for how, in terms of how everything will sort of change or how everything will turn out will be the 2026 World Cup. Obviously, of course, I mentioned to the audience that the ticket prices are a big point of contention. We'll see how, given the current political climate, things will turn out in the World Cups. Of course, there's going to be other developments. There's going to be many, many foreigners coming in, a good number of star players coming in, and depending on how things will go, I think 2026 will be a big year of changes. I think that I can say very confidently. The only thing we can do, as our listeners have heard of time and again, and as our first-time listeners continue to hear from us, the only thing we can do is wait and see. Have anything on your end to close off with?
Oh yeah, please. So I mentioned my take on 2026 and the Epstein files. So we don't run into any trouble. I'm going to just say allegedly, just to cover everything I say. Allegedly, and I'm going to say allegedly for the the past year and a half too, so we wouldn't, run into any things because again, it's like you said, uncertainty, we will wait and see. So allegedly that stuff I believe is going to happen. Of course, in light of what I mentioned about, 2025 being full of disappointments and of course, letting it dictate some people's, way of lives and state of minds. I just want to give you some, advice that I received myself from a good friend of mine. Isaiah Sweeting going as Grizz. You may know him on, TikTok, his threads, and his video game channels. So I just want to give a shout out to him. And I quote, and let me read this, as I'm shuffling through my files. Advice is to download TikTok, find a niche that you want to get into, research others that are into the same thing, and start making similar content on it that stand out. Profit. It's a new year, new chance to become a star. And honestly, that's not really bad. If you could rephrase it in any way, to into your own thing, you want to just reverse it into your own strategy, the best way you can, do that too, because anything is something. It's like my co-host eloquently said, people aren't even trying at all. I don't want to butcher what he said, but that's basically what it is. So if you could just take anything away from that, take away from our friend Grizz, is to do just that and just take advantage of what is about to happen in 2026 and just become the best at that before at least someone takes over. But hey, there's competition, and competition should be motivating, not discouraging. So that's how I want to close this episode on. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and for those who just tuned in for the first time, do us a favor and come back because you would not be disappointed.
Couldn't have said it better myself. For ladies and gentlemen, for the folks listening in, thank you for tuning in to the Starboard podcast. This is our first episode back. Again, I don't think I can beat how my co-host ended off today, this week's episode. With that being said, we'll be continuing weekly. By the time this episode comes up, it should be Monday, Tuesday. Of course, also anticipate the incoming TikTok clips, Facebook Reels, and of course make sure to subscribe to all the platforms, share, things of that nature. And we'll see you all next week.
Gather up my thoughts, roll through the observation field. Think about Dr. Tractors well up with a rapid angle.